All right. So we're just admitting a few more people, and then, as I said, we will go over just the few housekeeping bits and pieces and the welcomes, and we'll get started. I see Master Weekly there. Welcome, our president, ITA President, Master Weekly. Good to see you today.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Appreciate it. Good evening.
We'll do the little introductions.
Hey guys, Daniel Smith, Rob.
Have and Mr. Ryan, can I ask you, are you hearing me double, or are we not too bad?
Oh, you're fine.
That's okay. Yeah, I figured as much. Now, okay, so we don't have everybody just yet, but what we will do is go through the basic housekeeping introductions, and as people arrive, one second. I think I have. Sorry, folks, I needed to close off YouTube in the background of my own. Okay. So folks, first of all, very, very welcome this evening to our webinar with Brian O'Hingasa, who is a nutritionist and our expert for this evening, and very, very welcome. We'd like to also welcome our guests, or some of our guests, and in particular the ITA president, Master Kenneth Wheatley, who's here with us this evening. As a few elements of housekeeping, what we will do is keep all of the microphones muted. So we'll use, unless you're invited, of course, or if we invite you to ask a question, please use the chat function in order to pose questions, and if they're relevant during the session, we'll certainly bring them to Brian's attention. I'll moderate those questions. We have. Sorry, I'm just hearing somebody's background noise there. So what we will do is we'll use Mentimeter as well tonight, and I'll show you how that works. So for Mentimeter, it's very, very simple. You go to the website menti.com and use the code 9484450. And if you go there, you'll be able to ask questions that we can answer towards the at any stage during the webinar or at the end of the session. And if you've never used it before, it's very straightforward. Menti.com, and you'll see there's a code at the top here, 9484450. And you can join in and ask any question that you have. If the question's already been asked, you can vote it up, and we'll definitely get Brian to address those at the end of the session. So without any further ado, I'm going to take a step back and leave it to Brian, and hopefully you're happy to run away from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Adrian. Okay, hey everybody. Thank you so much for being with me here tonight. It's a wet and windy Saturday, at least in Dublin, so hopefully we can make something good of it. I'm going to get my screen share on now. So as Adrian said, I will be happy to take questions throughout, and I'll stop maybe at the end of every section and just check with you, Adrian, if there's any questions to cover, and if not, then we'll press on. So yeah, feel free to submit those questions into the chat box, and I'll look at the end as well to see if there's anything that needs to be done. Yeah, so we will get started. So as Adrian said, my name is Brian O'Hingasa. I'll be talking to you obviously about nutrition for your health and performance, or your athlete's health and performance, or your kid's health and performance, as it pertains to Taekwondo. I'll have this slide up at the very end as well, so you don't need to worry about my contact information just yet, but it will be there if you do need it at any point. So we'll get started. So you may have already seen some of what we're going to cover this evening in the advertisements, but just to go through it again, we'll be talking about, there's a lot of topics to cover. I want you to come away from this, you know, with a good idea of not only what you and your athletes need to be doing with your nutrition for optimal performance, but also some takeaways that, you know, you can use tomorrow or next week straight away to start getting improvements in that respect. So we're going to talk hydration. We're going to talk about performance in relation to calories and carbohydrate foods. We're going to talk about recovery in that context, protein for muscle repair mostly, and also sleep. Some section on health nutrients. Going to cover supplementation. Going to cover weight cutting strategies, as that is relevant in the sport, like most martial arts. How to then replenish after a weigh-in if you have cut weight. And I'm going to talk about what you can do on the competition day, tournament day nutrition to get the most out of it and perform at your very best. All right. I won't spend too long on this. I have a bachelor's of human nutrition from UCD. My main job is as a nutrition coach 1-to-1 and head nutritionist and coach at a company called Triage Method. And I also do lots of educational stuff like this, webinars and so on. You know, a lot of my clients are general population, but also I have a wide mix of athletes, past and present, in different sports, including martial arts. And I do compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu myself. I gave up Taekwondo, you know, a while ago at this point, unfortunately. And I've been watching a lot of Cobra Kai on Netflix lately. So that's got me all hyped up and ready to deliver this presentation. So let's get to it. First thing I'm going to talk about is hydration. Okay, I'm going to start with this because I think it can be a lost aspect of nutrition as it relates to performance. It can be overlooked to, you know, great detriment really to the athlete. So we're going to talk about, first of all, you know, if you consider how we evolved, we originated in the sea, you know, going back a long time. And as such, our cells are very much designed to have fluid and water in them, right? So it is perfectly fine to say that hydration is essential for not only our cell function, but also life overall. We need our blood to be hydrated. So we need, like, our blood is mostly water. We need hydration there to carry stuff around the body, right? But these are things like nutrients, oxygen. If you're dehydrated, you're not going to get that delivery of nutrients and other stuff that's important around the body, which is, as you can imagine, going to impair performance and your health. And a fun fact is that you can reduce blood pressure just by being better hydrated. So probably not relevant to most of the athletes, but just good to know.
Brian, just to very quickly jump in there, do you want to throw that into full screen presentation? At the moment, it's just in the PowerPoint window.
Oh, yeah, sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, better.
Yep, cool. That'll help. Thank you.
Rightio. Yeah, so water helps with the storage of nutrients. So I want you to remember this is glycogen, which is the stored form of carbohydrates. We're going to talk a lot about that if you haven't heard of it before. So you need water for that. It helps dilute acid levels in training. So, you know, that fatigue feeling, that burn feeling, if you're properly hydrated, you can offset that to a large extent, improve your performance in training and in competition, right? Then, you know, very, very mild dehydration will cause really big deficits in your mental and cognitive performance, both of which obviously are important for Taekwondo. You know, you need to be sharp with reaction times, and then you obviously need to be physically well capable to compete and to train. Now, how do you go about this? How do you decide how much fluid intake you should be having? And I say fluids as opposed to just water, because all water-based beverages are going to contribute to your fluid intake in the day, okay? So things like, you know, tea, it's mostly made with water. You know, diet sodas fall into this category as well. Milk is extremely hydrating, actually more hydrating than water because of the mineral content, which we'll talk about. But this is a simple rule of thumb, if you like, for fluid intake, right? So you take your body weight in kilograms. So in this example, 70 kilogram person, multiply that by 40, and then you get a milliliter value, and you can convert that to liters. So in this case, it's 2.8 liters for this 70 kilo person throughout the day, right? So you don't want to just consume all your water in the morning and then not have any throughout the rest of the day. You want to keep those cells hydrated throughout the day for the most part. Okay, so this is a good place to start. You're gonna have to adjust up and down depending on how much training you're doing, how much you sweat in training. The climate and humidity has a big impact on sweat loss. And this will, you may have to adjust the fluid intake based on these factors, but the 40 ml per kilogram rule is a really, really good place to start. So, you can use that straight away, assess your own fluid intake and see how it matches up, yeah? To determine how much fluids you're actually losing in training, simply enough, you just weigh yourself before training, weigh yourself after training. The difference in weight is how much fluids you've actually lost. So for example, if you lose 1 kilogram in a training session, that means you've lost 1 liter of fluid that you then want to replace, okay? And with that fluid loss, you lose minerals, which we're gonna talk about. So it's important to replenish both fluids and these electrolyte minerals, okay? How do you go about increasing your water intake if you're not very good for it? First of all, if you don't like drinking plain water, by all means, add some sugar-free My Waddy or something like that to your drinking water. This gets into like habit formation and stuff, which is a large part of my coaching practice. But, if you have a bottle on your desk all the time, you're going to be stimulated by that or triggered by that, which means that you will drink more water. So having it on your desk is important. The bobbin method, like women and girls especially love this anytime I talk about it. So if you take your bottle and, say your target intake is 3 liters of water, it's a liter water bottle, put 3 bobbins on around the bottle. Every time you drink a full bottle and go to refill it, take 1 bobbin off. At the end of the day, you have a good indication of how much you've drunk. Especially in the morning is an important time for fluid intake because you're after being dehydrating all night, essentially. You haven't been drinking water through the night. You potentially sweat a lot during the night. So first thing in the morning is a really, really good time to kickstart the hydration process. The hour before you train is important also. During training, of course, you know that, and then post-training, like I've talked about here, for fluid replenishment. Okay, so the next one is how we can gauge hydration. I may just make myself disappear if that's okay, so you can see the full slide. Gauging hydration, right? This is one easy way to do it. Okay, so you can go by your urine color. You want to be over on this side where it's that pale yellow, borderline clear color. That will indicate that you are sufficiently hydrated. Okay, if you're over this side of the chart, you definitely need to be consuming more fluids. Okay, and just to point out that if you take any B vitamins or a multivitamin that has vitamin B2 or riboflavin, that can turn your pee yellow. So in that case, it's not a good way to gauge your hydration. But in any other situation, it's a good way to go about it. Now, we're going to talk about electrolytes because this goes hand in hand with hydration and fluid intake. So electrolytes are just a group of minerals, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and chloride. Okay, so they have essential roles in the body, right? They help with absorption of fluids, particularly sodium. Again, they're essential for performance, for health, just for living, right? If your electrolytes get too out of balance, it has pretty serious life-threatening consequences. Not that it would happen under normal circumstances. We're talking about in disease states here, but just to show that they're very important. For example, you need adequate calcium for muscle contractions. And, you definitely need muscle contractions if you're going to be able to move and strike and kick, especially in training and in competition. So these are important to consider too. So there will be a certain amount of electrolytes and minerals in the water that you drink. Tap water, mineral water, they all have a certain amount of minerals in there. Salting your food can be a good idea. I like low salt in particular. So this is low sodium salt. It's about 50-50 sodium and potassium, whereas normal salt is just pure sodium chloride. So in this, if you use this, you'll get the two minerals for the price of one, if you like. So, and this is, this is important for athletes. You guys are going to be, or they are going to be sweating a lot. You're going to be losing a lot of minerals. So it's definitely fine to add a bit of this kind of stuff to your food. You can also look at electrolyte supplements like Diorolite, which I'm sure you're all familiar with at some time or another. I will say the main source of sodium in the Irish diet is from processed foods and breads. So, and that's processed foods, not to mean like unhealthy foods, just, foods that are in cans, packages and stuff tend to have more sodium added to them. So if you're not eating a lot of these foods, you definitely have to consider salting your food as an athlete, because that's something I see an awful lot in practice is someone is eating very, very quote unquote clean. So they've maybe taken out all these foods and their performance starts to suffer quite a bit. And the reason for that is actually usually their sodium intake is too low. And once we add that back in, their performance skyrockets again. Okay, so it's probably not going to be an issue for most people, but just to be aware of that. Other good source of electrolytes, sports drinks like Glucoside Sport. Coconut water is a great source of electrolytes and carbohydrates, which we'll talk about later. And then milk, as I already mentioned, is extremely hydrating. It's actually probably the best on that list. So milk is an excellent performance beverage, let's say, or food, provided you tolerate it well, have no issues with lactose. Even if you did, you could opt for a lactose-free milk and still be able to have it, okay? Fruits and vegetables, also an excellent source of electrolytes. And then carbohydrate foods in general, which we'll get onto, tend to be a good source. Before I move on, I'm just going to check the question situation.
So, Brian, yeah, nothing. We had one query just in terms of PowerPoint not showing up on YouTube, but we have that fixed. And other than that, we have no questions jumping out at us yet. So I'd say keep going and we'll see what come up in the next little while.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, guys. The next section we're going to talk about is actually fueling for your sport here, using both calories and carbohydrates. These are two major considerations. Okay. So, at its most basic level, we need calories because they provide us with energy that then is converted in the body to allow us to do all the things that we need to do throughout the course of our day to day, but then also in training. So like at a very basic level, if an athlete is not consuming enough calories, then their performance is not going to be as good as it should be. Okay. Because they just don't have enough energy available to keep up with the demands of their training. And it's very basic stuff here. Calories are also important when considering body composition. So by that I mean, muscle mass and body fat levels. So if someone wants to get leaner, i.e. lose weight in the form of body fat, that's going to be done by manipulating calories. You may not know you're manipulating calories, but if you're losing weight, getting leaner, that is what's happening, right? So, I can't go into this. This is a pretty big topic. Can't go into this in this presentation, but briefly, if your body weight more or less maintains itself over the course of 1 to 2 weeks, then you're probably at calorie maintenance. So that means that your calorie intake is about the same as your expenditure. So everything should just stay the same. If you're losing weight over the course of weeks, then you are in a negative calorie balance or a calorie deficit, which means you're consuming less calories than what you need. So the body goes and gets the rest of what it needs from your body fat stores. And if you're gaining weight over time, and I mean over weeks, not just day to day, because that just goes up and down quite a lot. But over weeks and months, then you are in a surplus of calories, which means you have more calories coming in than you need on a daily basis or weekly basis. And therefore the excess will be stored as body fat for use later on. Okay, just a very brief primer on that. It's important to know. So I mentioned glycogen already. I like to refer to this as the G tank. So glycogen tank, gas tank, keep that in mind. And you want this to be full in the context of your training. So glycogen is the stored form of carbohydrates in your muscles. You get a little bit in your liver, but mostly in your muscles. And this is the main source of fuel for your training, okay, and for most sports and activities. Okay, it is the stored carbohydrate in your muscle in the form of glycogen. All right, I want you to remember that's a really, really important point. That is where most of the energy for a training session comes from. All right, it's not necessarily what you ate just before the session. It's, you know, what have you been eating the last couple of days, and therefore how is your G tank looking? Okay, and as such, because Taekwondo and most sports are very, very carb demanding as the main fuel source, going on a low carb diet for a hard training martial artist is a really, really bad idea for performance. Okay, it just goes against the physiology of fueling for exercise. Okay, and you know, you can see low carb diets promoted for weight loss. The reason they work for weight loss is because they help manipulate calories. If someone has a very high carb diet and changes that to low carb and doesn't do anything else, they're going to lose a huge chunk of calories out of their day, and therefore they will lose weight. But that does not mean that it is superior for weight loss. Okay, you lose a lot of water weight with a low carb diet in the first week, which makes it seem good for weight loss, but that's a bit of a scam. Like, it's, you know, it's not meaningful fat loss. So really, if you are a hard training athlete, carbohydrate intake is extremely important. All right, if you want to perform at your best. The more training you do, the more carbohydrates you're going to eat. And carbohydrates, just so you know, have 4 calories for every gram of them. Okay. So for calorie intake, as a rough guide, now this isn't something I would do. I only get adults to, you know, track their calorie intakes, and not even everybody. So this is just if you're interested in potentially doing that. You know, it's not something I ever recommend to children or teenagers, but this will give you a rough idea of calorie intake, where you should start, and then start to adjust things based on whatever the goals are. So about 30 to 40 calories per kilogram of your body weight is going to be a good starting point. And it's quite a wide range. Like, you know, you can see for a 70 kilo person, that's 2,100, 2,800 calories per day. But like I said, you can kind of monitor your weight changes over the course of weeks to determine where you are in terms of your calorie intake. Okay, so, you know, to hit this, you're probably going to have 3 to 4 meals plus or minus some snacks as an athlete. You know, number of meals per day isn't important for, you know, general population. Not so much. Like, definitely there are nuances to this, but for athletes, you know, pretty regular meal times is definitely a good idea. And then for carbohydrates, this is the kind of range of carbohydrate intake you're going to look at: 2 to 8 grams per kilo of body weight. It's quite a wide range, of course, but that depends on, you know, your overall activity levels, and not just in training, but your activity levels throughout the day. Like, you know, are you sat at a desk all day, or are you working a manual labor job? There's a big difference in how much energy you will need in that context. And of course, how much training you're doing. Main sources of carbohydrates going to be fruits, vegetables, starchy carbs like potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, pasta, bread, snack bars, cereals, pulses like lentils, beans, chickpeas, and then things like, you know, sweets, jellies, crisps, etc. They're all pretty high in carbohydrates as well, in the form of sugar in the case of sweets or jellies. Okay. So this is just an infographic to give you kind of an idea of carbohydrate portioning. So you can see up here, 1 to 2 cupped handfuls of any of these kind of cooked carbohydrates per meal or snack is going to be pretty good in terms of estimating portions, to give you a gauge to start with. And then you can see these are all servings of these foods that provide 50 grams of carbohydrates. So you got 50 grams of oats plus about a cup of milk, a couple of medium-sized potatoes, 60 grams of dry rice, will be about 50 grams of carbs, 2 bananas, pint of chocolate milk, pasta, and a couple of slices of bread will usually do it. So, you know, this isn't going to be perfectly accurate, but it'll give you a pretty good starting point if you're trying to assess your intake across the day without having to get into, like, you know, weighing your foods out and tracking really diligently, which you might do as an athlete. You know, it's definitely not a bad idea as an adult, but this is quite handy for athletes to use for sure. And then to continue, these are, arguably lower quality carbohydrates because there's not much nutrients in these, and they're going to be digested very, very quickly. Now that can be useful in some contexts, which we'll get to. But just to give you an idea of the portions, so like an 80-gram bowl of Cocoa Pops is about 70 grams of carbs, so quite a lot compared to some other sources. That's kind of the point of this slide. This 200-gram bag of jellies is 150 grams of carbs. Like, it's not a very big amount of food, but it is a huge amount of carbohydrates. And I have an 80-gram bowl here because the serving size in the box is 30 grams, but like that's the little variety pack box. Like nobody's eating that much in a meal. So 80 grams is more realistic for a bowl of cereal. Bottle of Lucozade Sport, 30 grams of carbs, 500 mils of coconut water is about 20. Okay. Now, as athletes, you're going to be interested in carb timing. For non-athletes, not so much. But the idea here is to make sure that your glycogen tank is full and restored every time you go into a training session or into a competition setting, right? This is the idea. So the replenishment after exercise is especially important if you're going to be training again within, a 24-hour period. So say if you're only training once a day, say at 6 o'clock or less, most people aren't training every single day, then the timing isn't super critical. But if you're the type of athlete who's doing maybe 2-a-day sessions, the carbohydrate intake after your training sessions is what's going to fuel the next training session. So it is definitely worth paying closer attention to. I kind of alluded to this already, that eating a serving of carbohydrates before training is a little bit overrated because it's the actual glycogen tank that's fueling that session for the most part. But this does kind of top you up. So it is a good idea in the pre-training meal to have a decent source of carbohydrates and also protein, which we will get onto. Okay. So if you're going to eat some carbohydrates with each meal, you should be in a pretty good spot for your intake. And then with some emphasis on the post-workout meal, because you actually get enhanced glycogen filling in that tank in the post-workout meal because of the effect that exercise has on the muscles, basically. But again, this is most important if you're going to be training quite frequently. You don't have to worry about it as much. Like, it is optimal, but again, you don't have to worry about it as much training, only once a day or less. I shouldn't say only once a day, like that's a lot of training, but there are some people probably watching this that are training multiple times per day. This post-workout window is also the best time for those fast digesting carbohydrates because they will be absorbed very quickly and help fill this up faster. Okay, so again, this is especially important for multiple training sessions in the same 24-hour stretch. Now, before I move on to protein, Adrian, is any questions?
We do have a couple of questions coming in over Mentimeter. They're probably, for the most part, best kept to for a little bit later. But there is two that kind of come up that are kind of relevant to what you've just been talking about there. In particular, how might a ketogenic diet affect a Taekwondo athlete? And was bundled with that. You mentioned low carb was a bad idea, but if it was for a short term, i.e. a week or two prior to a fight, is it an efficient method, I presume, of weight loss? And how long would it take to replenish carbs in order to perform optimally? So maybe those two are quite related. Yeah,
they're great questions. I'm going to cover the second one about weight cutting. I'm going to cover that later on in the section about weight cutting. And for a ketogenic diet for an athlete, it's not a good idea unless you're using it to lose weight. It's pretty poor for a Taekwondo athlete, right? The only athletes that can get away with it really would be endurance athletes like marathon runners. But even they are going to have a performance deficit for not having carbohydrates because it is the main fuel source. So, the reason is basically that your body can't access fat as a fuel source fast enough to sustain something like Taekwondo. And if you're on a ketogenic diet, you're using basically just fat as fuel. So that's the reason why it's no good for a Taekwondo athlete. Another big problem with ketogenic diet is, if it's not done smartly, is electrolytes, because they're mostly found in carbohydrates. So if you pull out all your carbs and go on this nearly no carb ketogenic diet, if you pull all those out, you're going to lose a lot of electrolytes, and you're going to get something what's referred to as the keto flu. So ketogenic flu, you start to feel quite poor. You know, you almost have like flu-like symptoms, which can be offset by just consuming electrolyte supplements. But for an athlete, I think it's a pretty bad idea. And look, if you need to lose a lot of body fat and you want to use a ketogenic diet for that, I think there's probably better ways to do it that don't require elimination of carbohydrates completely. Okay.
Okay. So maybe we'll come back to the other questions a little later on.
Yeah. I have a section on that, so that will be answered as part of it. So
perfect.
Pressing on then, talking about recovery, we're going to talk about protein intake. Okay. Most of you are probably aware of this to a large extent, but protein, or specifically the amino acids that protein is broken down into, they're the basis for everything in your body that isn't water, really. So I know people automatically think protein muscle recovery, but there's a huge amount going on when it comes to protein. Like if you want healthy skin, hair, and nails, and your amino acid intake is too low, you're probably not going to have that. Enzymes kind of run all the reactions in the body. They're made of protein. Your immune system is essentially made of protein. So if you want poor immune function, you know, you can go on a low protein diet. So super important, not just for muscle recovery, even though that is the context I'm going to mostly discuss it in. Okay. So you need it because when you go in and train, you are using training to stimulate your body to adapt to that stress of training. Okay. You know, you don't make gains in performance in the training session. It's when you create that stimulus, then you go home, you know, you're eating properly, you're sleeping properly, and you're actually recovering. Your body responds to that stress to say, hey, you know, that session was pretty hard. I don't want to go through that again. So I'm going to come back stronger, better recovered, so I can deal with that next time it comes up. But obviously, it just relatively increases in difficulty as you go on. Like as you get to become a better athlete, a stronger athlete, you'll just work harder, and the same process repeats itself. But protein is an essential part of this recovery process. And, you know, if you're not eating sufficient protein intake, you're not going to recover as well. You're not going to adapt to training as well. And essentially you're not going to maximize your athletic potential. It's particularly useful in a weight loss or fat loss context, you know, over time, because protein is very, very filling and it helps control blood sugar and energy levels. So nearly every successful fat loss diet will have a high protein component. Okay. And there's good reason for that. And it's important to consume protein on a daily basis because there's no such thing as a protein tank in the body like there is for carbohydrates and glycogen. You know, we can store like almost endless supply of fat in the body to access if we ever need it. But there's very, very little storage capacity for protein. Therefore, it's important that we eat it every day. Okay. So 1 to 2 servings of protein with every meal. All right. Most people don't eat any protein at breakfast. So that's something you can go ahead and change right away. And we're going to talk about which foods might be good to include in this context. For an athlete, 3 to 4 feedings at the least is optimal for protein intake. You know, imagine someone who's only having 1 meal a day and they eat all their protein. So they have like six servings of protein in 1 meal. It's not a bad thing, but it's not going to be optimal for recovery and therefore performance. So as an athlete, 3 to 4 feedings at a minimum are a good idea. In terms of gauging quantities here, again, if you're going to roughly estimate things, 1.5 up to 2.5 grams per kilo of your body weight is where you want to be. Most people are probably not eating enough protein, athletes and general population as well. So it's one of the first things that I'll work on with anybody that I coach, and generally leads to you know, pretty good results. The quality of protein is important, and animal sources are best, and this is defined by how well your body uses them and also how many of the key amino acids are in them. So in this context, animal proteins are best and are slightly superior to plant sources of protein. So with that in mind, anyone who's vegan or vegetarian and limiting some of those animal sources, they may need to supplement amino acids in the form of EAAs, which just stands for essential amino acids, or protein powder. Like I'm yet to work with a vegan client or athlete that can get away without using a protein powder, whereas someone eating animal foods, they probably can if they wanted to, although protein powder is quite convenient. So portions of protein then that will get you about 20 grams worth. So if you want to have 1 to 2 servings per meal, that's going to be about 1 to 2 palm-sized portions of, things like yogurt, tofu, any of these meats when they're cooked. That's a good kind of rule of thumb. Eggs as well. So that's a good guide you can use. And because everyone's hands are proportional to their body size, it makes it somewhat individualized as well to your own needs. But then other ways to get about 20 grams of protein: 200 grams of high protein yogurt, excellent source of protein. So for example, skyr or zero fat Greek yogurt, things like Kvarg, quark yogurts, those sort of things. The fat-free options tend to be higher in protein, so it's not necessarily that they're better, they just have more protein. So say regular Greek yogurt has like 4 grams of protein per 100 grams, but the fat-free one has about double that. So that's important to keep in mind. 1 scoop of protein powder typically will be about 20 to 25 grams of protein. I don't consider protein powder to be a supplement, right? For me, it's really just a convenient way to get more protein in. So it's just a convenient food, right? And it happens to be very, very nutritious and useful. So you don't need to think about something like a whey protein as a supplement anymore. A good rule of thumb is about 100 grams of raw, meat, fish, poultry are going to give you about 20 grams of protein. Chicken, a little bit higher, turkey, a little bit higher. Beef is in about the 20 gram mark. But just as a good rule of thumb, like you're not going to make this super exact, and this will be good enough unless you're going to track everything, which you could do. 200 grams of pulses or tofu are going to give you about that much protein. Something like lentils and beans, they're going to add a lot of carbohydrates as well. So it's very hard as a vegan, say, to get protein just on its own, whereas like chicken is basically just protein, but things like tofu and beans, they come with other sources of either carbohydrates or fat or both. A typical protein bar is probably about 20 grams of protein. Any of the better ones tend to be about that much. 3 large eggs and about 500 to 600 mils of milk is going to be about 20 grams of protein. Okay, so that's a kind of a guide you can use because they'll be like the majority of your sources. You will get like little bits from grains, so like breads, oats, rice, things like that. They will contribute a little bit of protein. And if you're eating a lot of those foods, it could be significant over the course of the day. But when you're looking at putting your meals together, these are the ones you want to focus on to ensure you're hitting those high quality sources. Okay. Any questions on protein before I go on?
I suppose I'm just checking the questions that were there, and you've kind of covered what advice would you have for vegetarian athletes, particularly in relation to protein and recovery, was the one that jumped in there. So is there anything you'd like to add to that one?
No, I mean, I think I've covered that. You may have to look at an essential amino acid supplement to have with your meals. So with that, you're talking 1 to 2 meals a day, adding in that supplement. It's just as it tends to come as like a fruit flavored drink. Or you can use protein powders. So like pea protein is pretty good. Soy protein powder is okay. It's kind of low in one of the amino acids that's important for recovery called leucine. So pea protein is probably superior in that sense. And just, it's a case of making sure you're hitting those, servings per meal. And, if you want to roughly try and track just for a few days how much you're eating over the course of a day, try and stick to those targets that I mentioned, the 1.5 to 2.5 grams per kilo, because it is really important for your recovery. And if you're using mostly vegan or vegetarian sources, unless you're eating like fish, eggs, dairy, you nearly need to do more because the quality of the protein is not as good. But that's where the maybe amino acid supplements or protein supplements come into that. Okay.
So a kind of a follow-up question just in relation to the supplements themselves and the idea of, we say, a protein supplement being very much just a convenient source of food, really, rather than a protein, or sorry, as a supplement in the truest sense.
Yeah.
But the question kind of goes, which, does it matter which protein in terms of it being whey, casein, an isolate, a hydrolysate, whatever, what matters?
Yeah, that's a good question. The whey and casein are both going to be dairy proteins, so they're very, very high quality, the both of them. They're the two protein fractions found naturally in milk. So milk protein is about 80% casein, 20% whey. So they're derived from dairy manufacturing, and they're both super good options. The main difference between whey and casein is that whey is quickly digested and casein is more slowly digested. So, that means whey is probably better post-training, and then casein may be better with a meal or before bed. However, most people are not going to be having those shakes just by themselves. So, if you have a whey shake with your oats in the morning, for example, the oats themselves are going to slow down the digestion of that whey. So it becomes kind of a moot point talking about how quickly they're absorbed and digested. So generally, I recommend whey protein most of the time because it's a little bit cheaper. It tends to taste and mix better, and you have like more flavor options and stuff. It's by far the most popular protein supplement. So you can get casein, but it's kind of gritty in texture, and there's not as much flavor options, and you pay a bit more for it. But it's just as good as whey. To answer that, and like they're probably the best ones to go for, or look at the plant options like a pea protein. You can get things like collagen protein, which is pretty good. Not as good for recovery, but it's good for other reasons. Things like egg protein you can get, but the ones I mentioned would be the best in my opinion. Thanks, Brian. Sure thing. I will just minimize myself again. Okay, so this is very much a nutrition talk, but it would be remiss of me as a nutrition coach, where in practice I look at things holistically, like all lifestyle factors. It would be remiss of me to not talk a little bit about sleep, because I promise you this is the best performance and recovery enhancer you have available to you. Okay, it's number one, and it's probably one of the most overlooked as well. So if you look at the best professional athletes in the world, they sleep a lot. They're sleeping 9, 10 or more hours per night. And of course, it's their job to be the best athletes they possibly can be. They have the time and stuff to do that. But it literally, you can't do anything better for your performance and recovery than taking care of your sleep, which I'm going to discuss now. And yeah, this is one I just really like to hammer into people, because it tends to get overlooked. But if people buy into this and they pay attention and they get good sleep, you'll see your performance physically and mentally just really increase if you're not doing this already. So it's very well documented that athletes that sleep well have better reaction times. Okay, very important for Taekwondo. Have lower injury rates, much lower injury rates, which is important for any athlete, of course. And then obviously not getting infections and getting sick as much, because sleep does wonders for your immune system. So all these things are really important considerations for not just athletes, everybody, but you are my audience right now. So I really want you to take this on board and prioritize it. Like, that's the first thing you can do. Start to move sleep up on your list of priorities and say, okay, 1 more hour of Netflix is not my priority. Actually getting to bed is, so I can be the best athlete that I'm going to be. First, look at quantity. So are you getting 7 to 9 hours? That's the kind of sweet spot for most people. You should be waking up refreshed and fairly energized and ready to go on whatever amount of sleep you're getting. So it's usually between 7 to 9 hours. Again, like I said, professional athletes may sleep a little bit more than that. Quality of your sleep. I'm going to talk about sleep hygiene on the next slide. So once you're getting 7 to 9 hours in bed, at least, then we want to enhance the actual time you spend in bed in terms of sleep quality. And then the final one is consistency, right? And this is the one that's hardest for people to get right, just because of the way we live. You know, there's very much a distinction between weekdays and weekends, and how we socialize under normal circumstances anyway. But if you're taking care of your quantity and your quality of sleep, and you're looking for more in terms of your physical and mental performance, then consistency is the next one for you to look at. So trying to get to bed at a similar time and trying to wake up at a similar time every day of the week. And after 2 or 3 weeks, like, you'll notice a serious difference, which is then usually enough for people to buy into it. Be like, okay, I'm going to keep this up. So this is a little flow chart I put together to help inform decision making around sleep. So first of all, are you spending 7 to 9 hours in bed? The answer is no. Get it done. If you are, awesome. Then let's look at your sleep environment. Is that good? And by this I mean, is your room very, very dark? Do you use blackout blinds or a sleep mask, for example? Manta, M-A-N-T-A, is a fantastic brand of sleep mask. It's very, very comfortable to wear, and it blocks out all light completely. Regular sleep masks, like, light comes in, around the bridge of your nose and around the sides and stuff, not with the Manta mask. So would highly recommend that. And that can be, more useful if athletes are traveling to competitions and stuff. You may not be staying in your own room, so you may not be able to utilize your blackout blinds if you have those. So I'd say get the mask. It's a little bit more expensive than a typical sleep mask, but it is, I have to say, it's fantastic. Obviously, quiet room as much as possible. You can use things like white noise or silicone earplugs to try and help with this. And then, interestingly, we fall asleep and stay asleep better when we're slightly cooler. So we can probably all relate to when we have a summer, it's quite hot and we can't sleep. All right. So you can see that the temperature is important. So, having things a bit on the cooler side, you can add blankets and bedclothes and stuff if you're cold. You obviously don't want to be going to bed freezing cold. That's not the idea, but just slightly on the cooler side seems to be optimal for sleep. And, one of the reasons for that is evolutionarily, we would go to bed when the sun went down. What happens when the sun goes down? Things get a lot cooler, okay? And one way you can try and simulate this is if you have a hot shower or a hot bath in the evening or close to bedtime. Once you get out of that hot water, you will experience a rapid drop in body temperature because you're going from hot to, not so hot. And that can be really, really good for helping with sleep onset. Okay. So if you've taken care of that, you can ask yourself, do you have a wind down routine? Is there something you do before bed to treat sleep like a dimmer switch rather than just an on and off? Because if you go from doing something extremely stimulating to trying to sleep, you're going to be tossing and turning for a while, chances are. So if you don't have a wind down routine, there's lots of options for this, but these are some of the most kind of relaxing practices you can get in. So any sort of deep breathing work like meditation, this is a really good place for static stretching because that relaxes the body and the muscles. Trying to reduce your screen time and artificial light exposure is really important. Journaling, just to get stuff out of your head, that can be really, really useful. Yoga, again, has this kind of stretching, breathing component, reading, and so on. So, as much as you can give to this, if it's 20 minutes, half an hour, perfect. Avoiding super stimulating activities before bed. And, part of the idea here is to just have a routine, because as you habituate to that, then once you start your routine, it sends a signal to your body and your brain. Be like, oh, we're doing our sleep routine, time to wind down. Okay, so that's part of the purpose of it. And then once you have that down, you can ask yourself, is my sleep consistency good? Of course, you can look at this before all of this. But, am I going to bed at the same time? Am I getting up at the same time? If you're not, then that's one more thing you can improve. Okay. Any questions on sleep before I go on?
Yeah, Brian, we actually have a couple, and it might be a good time to handle them. All right. So the first question we had is probably slightly covered in your last slide, but what would be your top tips for getting to sleep quickly? So I don't know if there's anything that isn't kind of covered there.
No, yeah, that list there is going to be quite good, but it's like the point of having a routine and assessing and auditing what you're actually doing. Like, this is what I'll always ask my clients, like, describe for me what the last hour of your day looks like. And, you know, if you're training and, you know, you're playing video games where you're getting killed over and over, like that's going to ramp up your kind of adrenaline. Or if you're watching TV that does the same thing, that's not going to be good for you to then try and go to bed. If you're working or checking emails or studying, you want to do things that are relaxing for both the body and the brain, whatever that means to you, is what I would say.
Any particular impact on caffeine there?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good point. I would suggest to everybody that they don't consume caffeine within 8 hours of going to bed. This will have different effects on different people, but for the most part, yeah, caffeine is going to be a stimulant. It's going to reduce your sleep quality. Even if you can fall asleep okay, if you track this, your sleep quality is going to be impaired. So yeah, I would definitely restrict caffeine, you know, 5-6 hours at least, but better yet, 8 hours before bed, because there's no point in, say, using caffeine for an evening training session to improve your performance if you then don't sleep well that night, because that's going to just screw your performance right up. You know, no matter what you do, but you're not going to recover properly from that session. So there was no point. There was a question there about naps. Yeah, naps are very, very useful, especially for athletes, especially if you're not getting enough sleep at night. There are a few rules for napping. So with a nap, you want to commit to either 30 minutes or less, or about 90 minutes, and nothing in between if you want to wake up fresh. And the reason for that is just how sleep cycles work. So we start in a light sleep cycle, transition to deep sleep and REM sleep, and then come back into a light phase. And that takes about 90 minutes. So when you're trying to wake up from a nap, you're trying to catch it so that you're waking up before you go into a deep phase of sleep, or, you know, you've gone through a full sleep cycle and are in a light phase of sleep again. And that's how you avoid waking up and feeling groggy and like, where the hell am I? And man, when did a fridge fall on me during that sleep? Okay. We all know that feeling, but that's how you can avoid it. You know, obviously you want to avoid taking naps too close to bedtime, because you could, you know, limit your ability to get to sleep then. So, you know, naps are best had by like lunchtime or thereabouts, and not too long after that. Okay.
And then just, I suppose it kind of reinforces some of the points that you've made there, but tips for when it takes ages to fall asleep. So I think that's just the people experience that. I've never experienced this myself, as many people on this call know, but when it takes ages to fall asleep, is there anything that we can add to the discussion?
Yeah. So like this list of stuff here, you know, it's about relaxing and getting your mind relaxed. So it depends really why you can't sleep. Like if your mind's turning over, just write whatever's on your mind. If you're thinking about stuff you have to do tomorrow, write it all down, because that lets your subconscious rest, so to speak. Try these meditations or just deep breathing. So when I say deep breathing, just big, slow inhale, even longer exhale, and repeat that for, you know, 10, 20, 50 breaths. That's very relaxing. Again, limiting your screen exposure is really important. Limiting artificial light exposure. So you never really want to be on your phone in bed. There's apps you can use, like night shift mode on iPhones, or Twilight on Android, right? They can help filter out some of the light that's going to keep you awake, which can be useful. But ideally, you just want to limit your screen time in the evening. There are certain supplements you can use to try and you know, speed up the calming process. So L-theanine is one of those. I'll write that into the chat, I think, at the end, so people can see it. And a few others. But yeah, the question there is, you know, why is it taking me so long to fall asleep? Have I trained? So you don't want to train doing hard sessions within about 3 hours of bed, because that's going to get you all amped up, and you know, your stress hormones are going to be flowing through your blood. That's going to keep you awake. That's, you know, the same as having caffeine close to bed. So ideally have all tough training sessions finished about 2 to 3 hours before bed. Again, you can try the hot shower, hot bath, so you cool down afterwards. That can, using some lavender oil if you're having a bath, or even just in the shower, that can be relaxing. So lots of stuff to do. Just try out some of these techniques and try and cultivate at least 20 or 30 minutes before bed where you are doing things that are relaxing to try and promote good sleep.
Great, Brian. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. So thank you for the questions, guys. Really, really good stuff. So I've spoken a lot about nutrition for performance and recovery, and the protein and carbohydrate intakes, like they're what's going to make you as good an athlete as possible. But then we also have to consider these other macronutrients, so fat intake and fiber intake, as part of the protocol for a healthy human and a healthy athlete. Okay, so dietary fat, really important for hormone function, cellular health. It helps manage inflammation in the body, and fats are an excellent source of calories, right, for anyone who's maybe trying to gain weight. So their carbs and protein have 4 calories per gram, fat has 9. So if someone's struggling to gain weight, for example, using more things like olive oil in cooking or on like vegetables and stuff is a great way to get really easy calories in. Snacking on nuts and nut butters and things like that. Fats can be really useful there, but they're really important for overall health. So as a rule, you don't want to go below 30 grams of fat per day. And fiber then is found in carbohydrate rich foods. Okay, so generally when people talk about high quality versus low quality carbohydrates, they're talking about two things. They're talking about the micronutrient content, which are vitamins and minerals, and they're also talking about fiber content. So, when you compare carbohydrates, what makes one high quality versus another that's low quality is really the fiber that's in them, right? So really important for digestive health. It feeds your gut bacteria, the friendly ones anyway, and they have a huge amount of roles in the body. You could do a whole seminar on this. Helps regulate hormones and clear excess cholesterol to help manage cholesterol levels if that's relevant. So more than 30 grams a day is like the baseline or the optimal level to get the most health benefits from your fiber intake. But at the very least, we want people to be getting 15 grams a day. I think the Irish average is about 12 grams. So most people have some work to do on this. So 1 to 2 thumbs of fat per meal is a good place to start. You may not need much added fat to a meal. Again, this depends on your own personal needs, which I can't cover for every single person watching this. But if your protein source is higher in fat, so if you're having like salmon or you're having beef that isn't lean or eggs, you may not need to add too much fat to your meal. But if you're having things like chicken, turkey, white fish, very lean stuff, prawns, then you probably do. So this is a decent range for fat intake. Now, it's not a hard rule, but because carbs are so important for athletes, we would prefer to keep fats like on the slightly lower side, relatively speaking, and so we can keep carbs high within our calorie allotment to maximize performance. And I've said that already. So these are important fat sources, right? So oily fish, which are salmon, mackerel, anchovies, herring or kippers, and sardines, right? They are the oily fish. These contain the most important fats in our diet for health purposes. So 2 to 3 meals per week with those fish is critical. And if you're not a fish eater, like a lot of people in Ireland aren't, I'm going to talk about how to address that. Avocados, excellent. Olive products, rapeseed oil, nuts and seeds, dark chocolate, cheese, decent, milk, yogurt, and so on and so forth. They're the best sources all around. Although there are other sources, from meats and things like that, and eggs are very good too. I left them out there. And then in terms of fiber intake, you're usually going to get, in the higher quality carbohydrates, so things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, any brown or whole grain carbs, or things that talk about bran, so like bran flakes, all bran, all very, very high fiber carbohydrates. Pulses, so they're your lentils, beans, chickpeas. And then fruit and vegetables are a fantastic source of fiber and other nutrients. So they are naturally great to have in there, as everybody knows, but not everybody implements, unfortunately. So I'm going to talk here about, move that. I'm talking about vitamins and minerals anyway. Sorry, you can't see it. You can't see vitamins, but these are referred to as the micronutrients because we only need them in very small amounts. So for fat and carbs and protein, you may need hundreds of grams per day. For the micronutrients, you only need milligrams, so minuscule amounts, but they do have massive health implications. So these are the things, you know, the B vitamins, vitamin C, minerals like zinc, magnesium, iron, lots and lots and lots of these. And they've got hundreds of essential functions in the body for health and performance. So just to give some examples so you can try and visualize this, you know, if someone has low iron levels because of a low iron intake, you know, they may have iron deficiency anemia, which impairs oxygen delivery around the body, which is going to lead to fatigue. And, you know, you know as well as I do here that if you're an athlete who is fatigued and low in energy all the time, because maybe your iron levels are low, then you're not going to perform your best. If you have a low zinc status, then you can say hello to poor immune function, poor recovery, poor hormonal function. So all these micronutrients have massive amounts of roles in the body. Like, we can never go through them all in one session, even though I spent the whole session on them. But just to get you somewhat aware of them. And these are why, you know, diet quality matters. So I would never say that you can never eat, you know, quote unquote junk food or treat foods, right? But the reason you want to have most of your food coming from, you know, all the sources that we've talked about so far is because they're going to have more of these micronutrients in them. Okay, so like 80-90% of your diet going to come from what you consider healthy whole foods, and then the rest can come from whatever you like. And I should say as well that, you know, for anyone who might have a super high carb intake, using some of those lower quality sources like the Cocoa Pops or jellies and stuff like that can be helpful, because if you have to eat like 500 grams of carbs from, you know, just potatoes, it's going to be very, very difficult. It's probably going to cause you digestive distress. So as long as you're eating plenty of that food, and, you know, if you're eating that many carbs, you're eating a lot of food and calories, so your nutrient intake should be pretty good. Just not to scare anybody off those kind of foods completely, okay? So the foods that we've discussed already: animal proteins, excellent source of nutrients; dairy products, the higher quality carbohydrates, as I've mentioned. Fruits and vegetables are a fantastic source of nutrients. So between animal proteins and say dairy products and fruit and veg, that's how you're going to tick off all your micronutrient boxes, right? So as many different colors as possible is a really good rule of thumb, or to eat the rainbow. And particular emphasis on green vegetables like spinach, broccoli, kale, cabbage, and Brussels sprouts, because they're the ones people tend to neglect, and they also have generally the most nutrients in them. So, you know, I want people to eat many, many different types and colors of fruit and veg, but to certainly make sure that they are eating, you know, at least a couple of servings of greens per day, okay? So you can see I have the rough portion guideline up here, a fist-sized amount of vegetables, you know, 1 to 2 per meal at kind of a minimum, plus or minus some fruit would be a great idea. You know, most people aren't doing that, but, you know, that's something to work towards. I'll probably cover this section first because it might answer some questions that might have come up with this. So I'm going to cover supplementation, and then I'll stop again for questions, because there may be questions about supplements themselves. So the first point on supplements, it says filling gaps, right? So as I've alluded to already, like, you know, if your iron intake is low and you're not getting enough through your diet, and that's making you anemic, then, you know, that is a gap to be filled potentially with supplementation. So this is supplementation for optimizing health, let's say. So why would we ever have to do this? Because you may not be getting enough nutrients. If, you know, if your diet isn't quite high quality, chances are you're going to run into some deficiencies, or I shouldn't say deficiencies, insufficiencies. You know, this may be because you only eat the same few foods. So, you know, maybe you only eat carrots as your vegetable, therefore you're missing out on what's in the greens. You know, with lower calorie intakes, you're going to get lower nutrient intakes just because you're not eating enough food to get more nutrients in. So that's why I said for someone who has maybe a very high carb intake, they can afford to, you know, use some lower quality sources, let's say, because they're probably not squeezing out important nutrients by doing that because their calorie intake is quite high. And then exclusive diets that might exclude food groups, such as veganism, you know, you're going to miss out on things like B12, iron, zinc to a large extent. And that goes for any diet that, you know, cuts out entire food groups. Okay. So those are the considerations there. A lot of us don't eat oily fish, as I already mentioned. We have a great fish supply in Ireland. Unfortunately, people aren't that keen on eating salmon, mackerel, anchovies, herring, sardines. If you do, then fantastic. Make sure you're getting the 2 to 3 meals per week at least. And then, so the ones I'm talking about here, so oily fish contains omega-3s. They're those fats that I mentioned that are most important for our health. And then vitamin D. These are the two nutrients I see being low in most clients that I work with, and most athletes. So the reason for vitamin D is that we mostly get that from sunshine. You know, in Ireland, between March and October, as I have it here, between March and October, you can get enough from the sun. It doesn't have to be a sunny day. All you have to do is just get outside for about 15 minutes a day, with your face and forearms exposed. Okay, that'll be enough for vitamin D. But when it's not summer, so between October and March, it is quite important for everybody to take a vitamin D supplement. You know, vitamin D has loads of roles in the body, bone and hormonal health. It's quite topical at the moment. You guys may be aware, but it has roles in resistance to infection. So it's quite topical at the moment in relation to COVID-19, because the people who have low vitamin D levels tend to be suffering more with COVID-19, tend to have, you know, greater incidence of actually getting the infection. So something like 80% of the people who die from COVID-19 have low vitamin D levels. Now, I will say that's a bit of a misleading statistic, because about 80% of people probably have low vitamin D levels unless they're supplementing, right? So really, unless you're supplementing in winter, or you live somewhere sunny between October and March, you're probably not getting enough vitamin D. And it's still common. Like, I have clients in, you know, in the Middle East, like in Dubai and things like that, and they are vitamin D deficient because they stay out of the sun, or they're always layered up with sun cream. So even they, living in a sunny, hot climate, need to still take a supplement. So soft gels or drops, it's hard to go wrong, but I prefer soft gels or drops versus tablets. Have to generalize here in terms of the amount, because, like, ideally you would get your blood levels checked and then supplement based on that. But I could tentatively say, you know, that 1,000 to 2,000 IUs per day, which is the same as 25 to 50 micrograms, this time of year certainly is a good place to start. For the omega-3s that are coming from oily fish, or if you're not eating oily fish, it's important to note that these have to come from the sea. So there are some omega-3s in walnuts and flax seeds, so plant sources, but they are not the same as what we're looking for here, okay? So it has to be these marine sources. So from fish oil supplements, krill oil supplements, or if you're vegan, you have to get an algae supplement. Okay, 500 to 1,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA per day. I'm going to show you what that means now. I have a label that I'm going to show you. Some good brands on this. I would be cautious of getting too cheap brands here, because you want to make sure your fish oil is high quality. So Carlson's, really good brand. Clean Marine, they do krill oil, and they've just released a vegan algae supplement, which is very, very good. So if you are vegan, that'll be the one for you. You can usually get that in pharmacies, so it's pretty easy to get your hands on. There's other good brands like Eskimo, Manami. You know, I can only include a couple here, but that's what you want to go for. And then potentially using like a multivitamin for quote unquote insurance purposes. You know, if your diet quality, you know, it leaves a lot to be desired, you probably would be better using a multivitamin as well. You know, it's not a good substitute for a high quality diet, but you'll be better off using it than not. The quality of multivitamins matter a lot. I'm not too keen on just kind of the supermarket varieties because they tend to use lower quality ingredients and they're not that well dosed. So this is a good rule of thumb that I like to give to people, and this will help you screen out maybe poor quality supplements. So if the minerals such as zinc or magnesium come in the oxide form, so that's, you'll see that on the label, they're not good quality, they're not well absorbed, and as a heuristic, you can maybe say, okay, the rest of this multi probably isn't that great in that case, right? It's not a perfect rule of thumb, but it's pretty good. It should serve you well when looking to buy any of this stuff. Brands that I like, Now Foods, Revive Active is very, very popular in Ireland because it's sold in pharmacies and pushed in pharmacies. I think it's a little bit overpriced, but it is a good product. So, you know, if you want to be safe and get something you can easily get your hands on, then it's absolutely a good multi. And then Solgar, again, kind of on the expensive side, but definitely a high quality brand. Now, just to go back to what I was talking about in terms of omega-3, so you know how to do this at home. So I have a label here. I believe this is from the Carlson's omega-3s. So what you're looking at here is EPA and DHA, right? This is what I said is important, 500 to 1,000 milligrams per day. So you need to tally these up. So 300 and 200, it's 500 milligrams per one soft gel, okay? So that means you, with this product, with this dosages, per soft gel, you could probably have 1 or 2 per day and then be covered. Okay, this one's quite strong as far as they go. So most of them you'll have to take maybe 2 or 4, even 6 soft gels a day to get this sort of dose. And I will say that if you're using a krill oil or an algae oil, the dosage doesn't have to be as high. So 500 or even 250 milligrams would be plenty, okay? Now, I'm going to talk about performance supplements, and then I'll field any questions on supplementation, all right? So the first thing to point out, of course, is that supplementation falls under the, you know, the magic pill kind of level of attractiveness that, you know, you can take a supplement and then, you know, just be an absolute machine in life or in your sports. But, you know, the reality is if you're not sleeping well and you're eating poorly, you know, all the supplements in the world aren't going to do much for you, right? So you need to get that stuff sorted first, or at least alongside supplementation. I wouldn't say you need to sleep before you can ever take a supplement, but you're not going to be the best you can be just taking supplements and staying up all night and eating a poor quality diet, okay? So we've spoken a little bit about caffeine already in the context of sleep. So you have it here. You know, I would avoid using any caffeine within 8 hours of bedtime, unless it's a competition setting, of course, and you're willing to then sacrifice a night's sleep. But you wouldn't do that if it's going to be a multiple day tournament, potentially. So the timing of caffeine actually matters. So you see people drinking their caffeine while they're training. That's not a good idea because it's not going to peak in your blood for 30 to 60 minutes. So for, you know, say for people going to the gym or something, doing strength training, conditioning, you know, if you're finishing your can of Monster by the time you're leaving, like, you're going to be buzzed when you're sitting at home or when you're in the shower. Like, so it's very suboptimal. So timing matters. You know, 150 to 300 milligrams, generally a bigger person will consume more caffeine. You know, a can of Monster has about 150 milligrams. A coffee or 2 shots of coffee or 2 shots of espresso, I should say, will have about 150 as well. You know, Red Bull is about 80 milligrams in a can. But it's a really, really good performance enhancer so long as it doesn't affect your sleep and doesn't, you know, make you overly anxious or jittery where your performance isn't as good. And you probably want to save it, you know, for harder training sessions. So that way you maintain your sensitivity to caffeine. Therefore, it's going to give you the most return, because if you just habitually consume caffeine day after day after day, you'll either have to take more to get a noticeable performance improvement, because that habitual dose is not going to have much of an effect. But at the same time, you don't want to use this for the first time before competition, because you need to test these things out in practice beforehand. Next one I'm going to discuss briefly is an amino acid called beta-alanine. Very briefly, this helps reduce the kind of burning lactic acid sensation in the muscles when training, and therefore improves performance, especially in higher intensity activity. So not as much for things like long distance running, but for Taekwondo, a lot of the research is done in sprinters. So definitely good to use. Just as a note, beta-alanine has a side effect when you first start using it that gives you kind of a tingly or pins and needles feeling in your face and hands. Just to know that that is fine. Like it's not a, you're not having an allergic reaction to it. And it does subside after, a few days or a week of continued use, because you do want to take it every day to get that benefit. And, you can offset the tingly feeling by having it with food and then splitting your dose into 2 or 3 servings across the day. Okay. Creatine monohydrate is the most studied sports nutrition supplement out there. It's excellent for improving things like power, speed, strength. Again, not as good for endurance athletes, but it actually has a lot of health benefits as well for the brain. It's being used now in treating depression. And this is really important for vegans or vegetarians, right? Because even if you're not an athlete, because it increases cognitive function and brain function, especially in those populations who are not consuming much creatine, because you do get a little bit in things like red meat and fish. And the only contraindication here is if you have a kidney disease or disorder, you would want to check with a doctor first before taking creatine. For everyone else, definitely take your 5 grams a day. Even if you're not an athlete, I think it has huge benefits for nearly everybody. And then finally, citrulline malate is another amino acid. So this is like caffeine, just for training purposes. So you don't need to take it every day, but about 4 to 8 grams, about 45 or 60 minutes before you train. It helps improve blood flow, nutrient delivery to working muscles, and therefore improves endurance and reduces time to fatigue. Okay. So that's how you can use that. If you are going to be a tested athlete, it is worth paying attention to getting products that are informed by sport. You can check their website or their NSF certified sport, that they're batch tested, that they're guaranteed to not have any contaminants that may have you fail a drug test. Okay. That's important for athletes that may be tested. And you can check these websites out to see which supplements are batch tested, which are certified. My protein do have some products that fall into this category, but it specifically says, this is batch tested, informed by sport. So you can go and find those kind of products just to be sure. It's unlikely that'd be anything in there that would cause any issues, but it's better to be safe than disqualified. Yeah. So before I move on to the last section, pretty much, does anybody have any questions on nutrient intake in the diet, fiber, fat intake, or supplementation? There may be some questions there.
Yeah, so we've definitely sneaked in a few questions that are relevant, I think, to the supplementation side of things. So you might be able to see those there. So first one then, as creatine makes your body retain water, should it be dropped close to a weight cut? And what will the effects of dropping it be if you've taken it daily for the last few months beforehand?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I do cover this in this section, but I'll just cover it now just to get it answered. So this is correct. Creatine does cause water retention. So after 1 to 4 weeks of creatine supplementation, you can see your weight go up. You won't physically notice any difference because all the water goes into your muscles. So it's not like your typical puffy water retention we think about. And this is a really good question. And the answer is that there's no good research that I can find that says how long it takes for this water retention to disappear if you drop it for a weight cut. So the range that I've seen for it to take is 2 to 6 weeks, which it's a very wide range. And because creatine has such big benefits to performance, I prefer for my athletes to keep it in there if they can. So, to be on the safe side, if you did have to drop it out, you'd want to give it probably a month. But but as much as possible, try and keep it in there, because I think the performance benefits are worth it, unless you're really desperate to lose weight. Should coffee be avoided every day? So I think that relates to maybe what I was saying about caffeine habituation and tolerance. So I will say, first of all, coffee is, are you cycling through these, or?
Yeah, sorry, that was me. It's the question is still the caffeine question. I was just looking to the next one.
Oh, grand. Coffee is one of the best sources of caffeine, because it actually has a lot of healthy compounds in it, as well as the caffeine. So should it be avoided every day? Not necessarily. Depends how the caffeine makes you feel. But just for example, if you habitually have, say, 2 coffees per day, if you want to then get a big performance increase from caffeine in, say, a competition setting, you'd probably have to have, about twice as much. So to avoid that tolerance building up, you just avoid having it on consecutive days. So you can have it like one day on, one day off, for caffeine or coffee. And just to note that if you're going to use it for performance benefits, you'll probably have to increase the dosage or the amount that you consume above whatever is your normal. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
So I think this one was connected to a previous question, which is what sent me scrolling, which was, are supplements such as Zeflora beneficial? And I think it was Zenflor is the.
Yeah, I think that's a probiotic. Pretty sure it's a probiotic supplement. Are they beneficial? They can be, mostly in specific health conditions. So to give you kind of the short story of it, we don't know a huge amount about probiotics just yet. We know about them for, say, digestive conditions like IBS, how they can definitely be useful in that sort of a setting. But I think at the moment, it's probably not a useful recommendation to tell everyone to take a probiotic. If you want, so what a probiotic is, just in case people don't know, is it's just a bunch of live bacteria that you consume, and they, therefore confer some benefit to you. But if you want to feed your natural existing gut microbiome, which is what's going to do a lot for you, that is done by consuming the high fiber foods. Okay, so lots of fruit and veg is the best thing you can do for your gut bacteria, and things like pulses and beans. So, if someone wanted to try the Zenflora, they could, but I just don't think the evidence is there to support me saying, hey, every athlete should take this. I'd rather they get to consuming a lot of fruit and veg and support their gut health that way. Okay.
Perfect. So then we have a similar question in terms of Centrum.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it fails my rule of thumb test. So if you go and check what type of magnesium they use, I'm pretty sure it's magnesium oxide. And the dosage isn't, like, I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. And then the dosage for most of the nutrients in that is not very high. So it's okay, but there are better ones, I think.
Okay. So going on to the homemade side of things, are homemade smoothies with fruit and vegetables good for your 5 a day?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Again, kind of loosely in terms of supplementation, are the dietary fibers and protein bars really just hidden sugar?
That's a good question. Because some of them do have like an effect on blood sugar. So that person probably knows a bit about their nutrition if they're asking that. But they're not entirely hidden sugar, no. Like, are they the best source of fiber out there? Probably not. Like, would you want to rely on them for your fiber intake? Probably not. But they are okay. So the ones that are decent, if you check the labels on these bars, are going to be inulin, which is also known as chicory root fiber. So if you get like a fiber 1 bar as a snack bar, that's the type of fiber it uses. Some protein bars like Origin bars, I think they've actually rebranded, so I don't know what they're called now, but they are good sources of fiber. And then some of the other ones, probably not so much. Like, you want to focus on the kind of plant foods for fiber intake.
Just a question separate to Mentimeter there, but would it be advisable to take a probiotic after weighing in following a weight cut?
No, I don't see any reason why you might do that. Maybe related to something I'm going to discuss as part of this, but probably not.
Okay, I think the other ones are less related to supplementation, and we might cover them after you do this section.
Yeah, okay, 100%.
Perfect.
I'll crack on. So again, guys, thank you for the questions. All very, very good stuff. All right, so I'm going to talk about weight cutting and how to do this safely, because I know that weight cutting in martial arts can be pretty reckless at times. So when we're talking about weight cutting here, I'm talking about very rapid weight loss before a weigh-in for a competition. Okay, so we're talking about a 1 week out here, as opposed to fat loss. So actually just lowering your body fat levels and to lose weight that way. That takes weeks, maybe months, depending where you're starting. So this weight cutting practice is mostly about manipulating water. It's mostly about manipulating carbohydrates in the body, your G tank, and it's mostly about manipulating the contents of the gut. All right. So just to preface that. Now, obviously, as little weight as possible is best in terms of cutting weight, but just as a guideline, like no more than 5 to 8% of your body weight. So if you're trying to make it into the 68s, 1 week out from weigh-in, you can't be any heavier than 73.5 kilos, because that will require an 8% drop. And again, as little weight as possible, cut is better. And, as a disclaimer, you may want to do this under medical supervision. So we'll talk about ways we can do this, but just to know that, like, you're trying to cut much more than that, maybe you need to look at more fat loss leading up to a competition, or you maybe need to look, if you're quite lean already, then you probably need to look at fighting in a bigger weight class. Okay. The point here is, like, how much of a competitive advantage does weight cutting give in Taekwondo? Like, it's quite popular. And I was talking to the lads about this. It's quite popular, because of, the popularity of MMA and the UFC and boxing, and they see people doing these big weight cuts. But the reality is, like, especially in Taekwondo, like, more of a case where it may be in the likes of MMA, but in Taekwondo, you don't get any points for being, the leanest guy or girl at a competition, first of all. And, how much of an advantage is being much bigger and heavier and stronger going to give you, where it's more skill based and like, trying to score points with your strikes. So just to keep that in mind. And, the bottom line is, like, you've worked hard coming up to this competition. Don't let shitty practices here, rob you of that because you come in too depleted, try and drop too much weight, and your performance suffers as a result. Like, you've done all the work at this point. So, give yourself the best chance to perform at your best, because that's what you deserve once you get to this stage. So, actual ways to drop weight. I'm going to list these in order of preference for me in athletes. Okay, so a low residue or a low fiber diet, right? So when you eat a high fiber diet, that fiber sits in your gut and creates what's known as residue. So if you go on a low fiber diet for a few days before a weigh-in, this obviously assumes that you are eating a decent amount of fiber and eating, a high quality diet, lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of high quality carbs. If you're not, then this isn't going to do much for you. But what this looks like in practice is eating, a lot of protein rich foods, a lot of, high fat foods. Like these have no residue, no fiber in them. And then, reducing your intake of fruits and vegetables, and also eating low fiber carbs. So this is where you'd actually want to switch to things like white bread, white pasta, the kind of lower quality cereals like the Cocoa Pops, Rice Krispies and stuff, because they're all low fiber. So we're going to switch to them, and that residue then leaves the gut. And, you could, like, personally, when I don't compete in jiu-jitsu, this is what I try and aim for to use, only because the weigh-in is right before competing anyway, so you can't be super depleted. But, I'll drop 1.5, 2 kilos just from doing this, because I eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and fiber. So it's the least invasive. It has no impact on performance, and you're only doing it for a few days. So that's why it's my favorite one to go to. And this is where, like, that question about probiotics after weigh-ins, like, is that a good idea? That got me thinking a little bit about this, because like I already said, high fiber diets support your gut microbiome. So could having a probiotic after having low fiber intakes be beneficial? Maybe, but in the context of 2 to 3 days, it's probably not going to have much of an effect. Okay, so you probably don't need to worry about using a probiotic with that in mind. Next one we'll talk about is water cut. So, as the name doesn't suggest, in the first place, you have to increase your water intake rapidly or massively. So, if you're drinking, say, 2-3 liters of water a day, you want to double that. You want to get up to 4-6 liters of water a day, maybe even a bit more. For the 3 to 4 days. So imagine your weigh-in is on a Saturday. You may start this really high water intake on Monday or Tuesday, okay? And then on the Friday, so the day before the weigh-in, you want to drop your water intake back to about a quarter of what it already is. So maybe 1 to 2 liters or thereabouts. And what happens here is basically your body gets very used to excreting that huge amount of water because you're drinking so much. And then it takes, a little while for it to catch up, if you like. So you drop your water intake back down on Friday, and your body still sheds water from the body, excretes it like you're still drinking the 6-8 liters or whatever it might be. So that's how you go about that. So it's big increase in water, and then cut it back the day before your weigh-in. Okay, and then you won't, depending on how your weight is, you won't have any fluids at all before weigh-in, because in Taekwondo you have time to replenish, which we'll talk about. You have time to replenish after weigh-in before you actually have to compete. So you can afford to do some of these next practices. So like going low carb. So there was a question that came up earlier. If you go low carb about 5 days out, so we're talking 30 or 50 grams of carbs or less. So you're eating mostly protein and fats. The fats are going to be a good way to keep your calories up, so you don't lose energy without making you heavier. Some fruit, maybe some vegetables that are low residue. So you might have to look up a list for what those are, but if you just Google low residue diet, you'll find it. Basically, it means taking the skins off vegetables, not having vegetables that have seeds or fruit that have seeds. So, if you're to eat an apple, you'd probably peel it, and you can have some spinach. It's pretty good. Asparagus tips, mushrooms are low residue. But yeah, you're going to be mostly having protein and fats. And then what this will do is drop all the weight that's stored in your glycogen tank. And with every gram of glycogen that's stored, there's also 3 or 4 grams of water. So you lose a lot of water weight here as well, in addition to, say, doing the water cut. Now, I mentioned already that sodium is a key mineral in the context of absorbing water and water retention in the body. So about 2 or 3 days out from your weigh-in, if you greatly reduce your sodium intake, it helps excrete a little bit more water. And again, like part 3 and part 4 here, you wouldn't do unless you had time to replenish and recover after weigh-in before fighting. It's going to affect your performance otherwise. Then you can use a gentle diuretic. So like dandelion root is a supplement that you can get in like health food shops, which has a mild diuretic effect. Now, I'd steer well clear of any pharmaceutical grade diuretics. They can be quite dangerous to use, and athletes have died from abusing those. But dandelion root, very safe to use. Only the 1 to 2 days beforehand, if needs be. And like I should say, because once you start chugging loads of water, you're not really going to know how your weight's looking until the actual day of the weigh-in, right? So, whether you use something like this is more based on like how much you have to lose over here. All right. So yeah, you can use that as recommended on the bottle, just for the 1 to 2 days. It may help you lose a little bit more water. And then, purposeful sweating using a sauna. Saunas are much better than steam rooms because steam rooms place a lot more stress on the body and you don't lose as much water weight. So if you're going to use this as, maybe a last resort, if you still need to cut some weight, you're going to do it as close to the weigh-in as possible. Go in for 15 minutes, come out, dry yourself off, weigh yourself, repeat that 3 or 4 times, provided it's safe to do so. Again, this is why it's kind of bottom of my list, because, the use of diuretics, not dandelion root is fine, but the use of diuretics and kind of this sweating is kind of lower down on the safety list. So, keep doing that until you're about 0.3 kilos away from your weight, and then you should be okay, because you'll lose a bit more between leaving the sauna and going and doing the weigh-in. But, obviously if you can avoid using a sauna, that would be great. And then I already answered the question about creatine. So that is covered. And then it's just an infographic just to show you, visually that it goes down the chain here in terms of what's going to affect your performance. So low fiber diet won't affect performance at all. Water cut, not really. Low carb. Again, this would assume though that you're not having time to replenish, which you will. So it's not that critical for Taekwondo, but also you have the safety. So the low fiber is the safest and has the least impact on performance. Use of any medical grade diuretics can be quite dangerous. Definitely wouldn't advise it. Messing with sodium intake, potentially be harmful. Not in you guys' case, it's not going to be an issue. But just to give you a visual representation of that. I'll cover this first, and then we can go. Well, I'll just finish it off because we're nearly done, and then I can take any more questions. So, replenishment after weigh-in. You've done your weight cut if needs be, and now you're going to look to recover the lost weight. You're going to replenish your fluids. You're going to replenish your electrolytes or your minerals, and you're going to fill up your G tank once again. Okay, and then you're going to be absolutely good to go in the tournament or the competition. So I have a replenishment shake or a drink that I'm going to discuss on the next slide. And yeah, just one key point here is once you start drinking fluids after a weigh-in, it's tempting to guzzle it, but sip it, right? Because your kidneys can only excrete about 1 liter of fluids per hour. So you should use that as somewhat of a guideline and not drink much more than 1 liter per hour. For about 3 to 6 liters total per day after the weigh-in. And you want to stop that 3 to 4 hours before bed, so you're not getting up multiple times in the night because you're not going to be as well rested then. If you're fighting the next day, or maybe even a few days, in that context, maybe not as important. But yeah, sip it, don't guzzle. And, you should do this anyway. You should cut your fluid intake so you're not waking up to go to the toilet. And then therefore disturbing your sleep and therefore disturbing your recovery, energy levels, and so on. If you've done that low carb approach to drop your glycogen levels down, you want to be feeding a lot of glycogen or a lot of carbohydrates in to restore those, which can get up as to that high end of the range of 8 grams per kilo of body weight. Important to stick to foods that you're used to. You don't want to create a load of inflammation, a load of digestive distress by eating things that just don't suit you or you haven't tried before. Most foods will suit most people, provided they eat them somewhat regularly. You want to salt the meals that you have here, and you keep your fat intake on the lower side because you're trying to get so many carbs in to replenish those stores. So fat intake doesn't get as much of a priority, and you want to just keep eating protein as you normally would so that your muscles are recovered. That's, like I said, you want to do that every day, pretty much no matter what. So this is the replenishment drink or shake that you can have as soon as you weigh in, as soon as that's done. So we're talking about 1 liter of fluids, all right? And within that, you also want to get about 30 grams of carbs, about 5 grams of creatine. But if you're having like two 2 or 3 of these a day, after weigh-in or in the morning of the competition. Just 1 or 2 servings of creatine is enough. Too much and you might get, digestive upset or something. And then electrolyte powder like Diorolite or Noon is a good idea just to help get those electrolytes in. Again, this is just in the context of after weighing, potentially fighting the next day. If you have a few days beforehand, you don't have to be as regimented on this, but this is to give you an idea. And the carb sources could be a carb powder supplement such as Vitargo or glucose powder. Vitargo is extremely well digested and absorbed without any kind of digestive upset. So it's a high quality one for athletes. Sports drink, like we talked about earlier, 500 mils of liquid sport, give you 30 grams of carbs, about 700 mils of coconut water. So, you could make a drink up 700 mils of coconut water, and then, add another 300 mils of water. Fruit juice, is high in sugars and carbs, but if you're going to drink a lot of fruit juice, probably going to run into some digestive upset, which you obviously don't want. Now, electrolytes, milk is also a very good source. So you could be having some milk throughout the day as well to help replenish those fluids. And then just briefly, nutrition on a competition day. This is going to be to obviously maintain your focus and energy levels on a competition day. You've essentially done all the hard work now. It's just a case of competing. So it looks quite different to your everyday nutrition in the sense that the quality of the foods on paper are going to be less or lower quality, I should say, because you're basically trying to get a lot of fast digesting carbohydrates in. And this is what's going to sustain you and deliver those carbs to your working muscles. So just to point that out, like, this is not obviously how I'd tell people to eat every single day of the week, but in a competition setting, performance comes first. You're not going to become unhealthy by eating like this for a day or over a weekend, whichever it may be. But 2 to 4 hours before you go to compete, you want to have a normal meal, like something that you would usually have pre-training. So that would be some protein and some carbohydrates, most likely. You could have another replenishment shake drink 1 to 2 hours beforehand. You can also sip on this throughout the day as well to get your fluids in, get your electrolytes in, carbs in, or you can just eat the fast digesting carbs. So like I said, these are going to deliver and digest quickly, which can be important on a competition day. But look, if you have an hour or two between matches, sometimes you can eat, slower digesting foods. Protein foods are good because they'll stop you from getting really hungry, although most people probably aren't going to feel that hungry on a competition day. But having the protein is going to help your muscles recover and kickstart that recovery process, so you're not completely in bits the next day. But those are some good options to choose from. And it's just really about getting those, like I said, fast digesting carbs in, having some protein sources as well. And you can opt for slower digesting stuff if you have some time, if you have a couple of hours or maybe 1 hour between matches, then that's fine. And then obviously stay well hydrated. Okay. And I think that is it. So thank you all so much for sticking with me for this long. I hope it was informative. I would like to open up to the rest of the questions you might have, please. And we'll take it from there.
Thanks a million, Brian. If you want to cancel the screen share there, and I will bring this one up as well. It should
just let's point out my contact details are there for anyone who needs them. I do work mostly as a one-to-one nutrition coach, so if anyone feels like they could benefit from that, that's where you can contact me, or at triagemethod.com. I cancel the screen share.
Perfect.
Okay, here we go.
So we do have a few questions. Before we jump into the Mentimeter ones, there's just one more I wanted to take over from YouTube, and it's just from Mr. Bina Mason, and it relates to the water cut and maybe in relation to the sodium manipulation and so on. Is there any issues in terms of hyperhydration? In particular, in her case, she's mentioned she has seen people seizure with low sodium due to drinking excessive water.
Yeah. Like that. Yeah, that is the issue then with low electrolytes and low mineral status, which is why it's kind of lower down on my list of things to do in the context of a weight cut. So, and because you may be combining that with the high amount of fluid intake. So, yeah, it's maybe a riskier one to engage in. So it's kind of near the bottom of the list. But I as long as they're not drinking like really, really excessive amounts of water, any above 8 liters, like you probably shouldn't be going into that territory. Even 8 liters is kind of high unless it's a big guy maybe doing it. But even if you are drinking water, like your mineral intake won't go to zero, because there is some minerals in the water, and that's why you only do it for like maybe 2-3 days at the most beforehand. So there's not as much time to get that severe depletion of those minerals, and then you're going to hammer them back in the replenishment context.
Okay, so we might this is one of the earlier questions, but what kind of macro breakdown might you look at considering the demands of our sport? So I suppose in terms of fueling for training rather than fueling for competition, maybe if we look at for like the weight cut. So if we think of
normal
training calories,
what are most days going to look like? So to get your macro needs right, if you're going to go into this, like you'll do a bit of calculations on it, but you'll first establish a calorie intake, right? And I have guidelines for that earlier in the presentation. So 30 to 40 calories per kilo. So you start with that. Then you will set your protein intake. Okay, so 1.5 to 2.5 grams per kilo. Once you have that established, because protein is 4 calories per gram. So say you have 100 grams of protein that you're going to eat, multiply that by 4, 400 calories, subtract that from your calorie total. And then what you have left is to then assign some fats. Like I've put these figures throughout the presentation. It's going to sound kind of complicated me just saying it now, but so that's 0.8 grams to 1 gram of fat per kilo of body weight. So if someone is 50 kilos, then it's 50 grams of fat. Fat is 9 calories per gram, so that's another 450 calories gone off whatever your total calories are, and then whatever's left in terms of calories, divide that by 4, and that tells you your carb intake. I know that sounds quite complicated, but that is the answer. So what it's going to look like is high protein, high carb, moderate fat, generally speaking, for the demands of this sport.
Okay. Best source of protein? Kind of covered, but
yeah, I mean, just a variety of animal sources. Like variety is quite important in nutrition. So like some that are very, very high quality are going to be like dairy protein, eggs, meat, fish, poultry. All of those are excellent.
Okay. With the gram per kilo of body weight ranges for each macro, should that be based off the current weight or a target weight?
That's a good question. The way I have it laid out, it can be based off your current weight. When some people are calculating, like they might say, higher levels, 3 grams of protein per kilo of lean body mass, but most people aren't going to know what that is. So it's easier just to use your current weight. And if you're trying to adjust your weight, like if you have a target weight that's higher or lower, that's going to be mostly determined by your calorie intake.
Okay. So as we go through then, let me see. I know we actually did manage to answer that one, I think.
Sorry, just to answer the latter half of that.
How long would it take to replenish carbs after a low carb diet?
Yeah, so that's basically what I described in that replenishment protocol after a weigh-in. So, if you really wanted to sit down to it, you could replenish them in about a day, 2 days, absolutely.
Perfect. Let's have a look.
And sorry, I'll just confirm on that one. Like, you probably don't need to go low carb 2 weeks out from the fight. 1 week, as I described earlier, is enough.
Perfect. So any foods or supplements that combat pre-fight nausea?
Yeah, so this is nerves based. So some foods that can help with nausea, like ginger is one. So if you maybe have some ginger tea, close to before the fight, that may help. But it is mostly just fight nerves, like the adrenaline's pumping. Like I know myself, how that feels in competition. So personally, what I do in competition to avoid, I avoid caffeine because I'm already kind of amped up enough, and I'll take that L-theanine supplement, which I'll just write into the chat now because I mentioned it already, for sleep. That has quite a calming effect on the body. It's found naturally in tea, hence the name. So I'm just going to write that in, pre-fight nerves. So I use that personally to help calm down a bit more, and that can help for sure. So about 200 milligrams, 400 milligrams of that. I'll write that as well. Maybe 1 to 2 hours, let's say 2 hours beforehand, should help, because it's going to help calm you down a little bit more without obviously detrimenting your performance or anything like that.
All right. So good answer there. What type of bread has the most protein?
The higher fiber, so the brown breads, I think, will have more protein. But like I mentioned earlier, you're not going to be relying on bread to get your protein in. A slice of bread is usually going to have like 3 to 5 grams of protein. Things like rye bread, sourdough are decent when it comes to protein. The protein in bread comes from the gluten part. So when you hear about bread protein, it's just gluten.
Okay. Any tips for eating for injury recovery?
Yeah, 100%. There's a few things you want to tick off here, and most of them were already covered, but protein intake is very, very important. So definitely making sure you're eating enough protein to help that injured area recover. Because as I said, the body is made up of protein. Everything that's not water is pretty much protein. So that is really important. Eating enough calories again. So even if you are injured, you may feel like, oh, I'm not as active, so I can eat less. And while that's probably true, if you're injured, your calorie demands are slightly higher than normal, even still, because the injury recovery is demanding more calories. So you'll see it. I'll see it all the time in practice that people don't recover from injuries as quickly if their calorie intake is too low. So that's something to consider. And then anti-inflammatory foods, which are going to be basically the fat sources that I mentioned, and also lots of fruits and vegetables. They're going to help with injury recovery. And of course, sleep is going to be one of the most important things in that context. And actually, one more point on that. Citrulline malate, which I mentioned as a performance supplement, because that helps increase blood flow and improve blood flow around the body, that can help with injury recovery too, because it means you're going to have better delivery of nutrients for recovery to the injured area. So you can also use it in that context. Slightly lower dose, but you might take, say, 2 to 5 grams, 2 to 3 times a day, say, if you're injured.
Okay. Is there anything that every athlete should consume? I don't know how to tackle this one.
I mean, a high protein diet and a high plant diet, I would say. But then also carbohydrates, everything I've talked about already.
Hopefully the rest of the presentation from when that question came up covered that one.
I hope so. Jesus.
Yeah,
I haven't done a very good job if that's not the case.
If we missed that one. Any tips for people who find it hard to eat on competition day due to nerves?
Yeah, so this is very common, of course. What I mentioned already about the L-theanine in relation to nerves, and then you're going to have a much easier time digesting liquid calories than you are solid foods. So again, smoothies, shakes can be more useful in that context. Eating foods that you find more appealing at the time, that are generally easy to eat. So any of those competition day foods that I mentioned are generally easy to digest, easy to eat. So they're good ones in this context as well. And also, this is a good tip for just everybody and anybody, but taking a few deep breaths, like I talked about for like before bed to help relax the body. Taking a few of those deep breaths before eating will help relax the body and help improve digestion. So say if you're going to have like a smoothie or something, do some deep breaths beforehand, then drink it, and you'll digest it better instead of it just going through you, essentially.
All right. The last of our, we don't have that one here. So what was the recommended dosage for citrulline malate?
Did that just come in now, or was that in there earlier?
No, I don't know when that one landed in there. I'd say that's just come up since we were started talking about it.
Okay, yeah, sure. Because so in the context of,
I think this was in the context of as a performance supplement rather than for healthy recovery from injury.
Okay, yeah, the dosage there was between 4 and 8 grams, about 45 or 60 minutes before you train. And the higher dose, like start out with like about 5 grams, see how that feels. And heavier athletes, will be able to take the bigger dosages pretty much.
We just had one other question that came in through our chat feature then as well, which was, do you have any tips or advice for people who are working shift work? So caffeine and quality sleep can be an issue, but food and diet wise.
Yeah. Like shift work, I work with a lot of people who work shift. So this is something that we look at a lot, and there's quite a lot of things you can do, to be honest. Depends kind of on the type of shift work you do. Like if you're working shift, like, 3 days in a row and then maybe have some time off. Basically what you're trying to do here is you can limit your food intake between about midnight and about 5 a.m. So this has health benefits because basically we're not meant to eat too much during what's called the biological night. So when you're going to have meals while working overnight, it's best to have them be high protein, reasonably low fat, low carb meals. So a really good example is like some high protein yogurt and some berries. Okay. This has health implications for things like your cholesterol and your blood sugar management, which all relates to your performance. And then I recommend having like quite a big meal before you go and start the shift. And try and get most of your eating done before midnight thereabouts. But obviously you have to be practical as well. So if you're going to have something like what I described, because we all know the selection of food that's usually consumed on shift is pretty low quality. You have to be absolutely regimented even about your sleep. So doing all those things that I recommended for sleep. If you're a shift worker and you can get prescribed some melatonin, that can be quite good, because a lot of the kind of the health impacts of shift work are thought to be from melatonin deficiency, let's say. So melatonin, just briefly, is the sleep hormone. So we start to make that when it gets dark, which is why limiting light and screens before bed is important. But if you're working shift and you're up all night and you're exposed to artificial light, you can end up deficient in that. So if you can get a melatonin prescription from your doctor, that's a good idea. You can, like, it's available over the counter pretty much everywhere else except Ireland. So like you can try order it in from the States. If that's all you're ordering, it'll probably get here. Sometimes it might get confiscated, but it's not that expensive. And having a small dose of that when you should be asleep, let's say. So, around midnight, and then say around like 3 or 4 a.m., just a small dose, like less than 1 milligram. That can help offset some of those negative health implications. And again, same kind of rule applies for caffeine. Avoid caffeine 8 hours before bed. Even if you are going to bed in the morning, you need to have that sleep mask so that you're sleeping in the dark. Avoid training after shift if you can, because that's going to make it harder to then sleep because you're going to be all revved up. Anything else for shift workers? You can get blue light blocking glasses, which achieve kind of the same thing as reducing light exposure. And everyone can get these if they want, but they're particularly useful for shift workers. So if you just search for blue light blocking glasses, I like my clients to wear them if they can on their shift. It can just help with the melatonin thing a little bit. I think that's about it. And then, yeah, it's mostly about doing as best as you possibly can with your sleep. You may end up eating more food on the days where you transition, because you're awake longer, and that's fine. But, try and not miss too many meals, let's say. Oh, I can't hear you, Adrian.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was me on mute, and trying to not interrupt you on the way. So I think we shall finish there. So Brian, thank you so very, very much for the presentation, for the webinar. For everyone who stayed with us and paid attention the whole way through, whether on Zoom or on YouTube Live. Again, thank you for your attention. And of course, if you've any questions or queries that weren't answered here, make a good note of them. Brian has given his contact details there, and if you would like to specifically consult with Brian, I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from you. So with that, I'll certainly wish you a very, very good night on behalf of the Irish Taekwondo Association, and again on behalf of the ITA, thank you very much to Brian. And if you want to say anything before you sign off.
Yeah, just thank you so much for having me. Absolute pleasure to be here to present to you guys. I hope it was informative. I'd love any feedback, Adrian. So if anyone wants to send you feedback, you might pass it on to me. That would be awesome. And I appreciate you, spending a couple hours here on your Saturday evening to listen to this. So thank you for having me. Thank you for paying attention. And I hope it was valuable.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. And good night, and enjoy the rest.